Mr. Thompson, your little weed patch is a disgrace to the aesthetic harmony of this community. The voice dripping with the syrupy condescension of a petty tyrant belonged to Karen, the president of our homeowners association. She stood at the edge of my 5-acre property, a clipboard clutched to her ample chest like a holy text, her posture radiating the unassailable authority of someone who had just won a minor skirmish over mailbox coloring and now believed she was qualified to command armies. Her shadow, long in the late afternoon sun, stretched across the edge of my wildflower field, a dark, encroaching stain on a canvas of purple coneflowers and golden black-eyed Susans. I had been on my knees, gently thinning a patch of milkweed to give the monarch caterpillars more room to thrive, the scent of rich earth and sweet nectar filling the air. Now I rose slowly, my joints complaining, and wiped the soil from my hands onto my worn jeans. I looked from her smug, powdered face to the field, my field, which was vibrating with the hum of 1,000 bees and painted with the frantic, joyful dance of butterflies. A weed patch. I felt a cold, hard knot form in my gut, the same feeling I'd had in the Army right before everything went sideways. The board has voted, she continued, her voice rising with a theatrical finality, ensuring the 2 or 3 nosy neighbors pretending to trim their hedges could hear every word. We are exercising our right under Article 7, Section 3 of the Covenants to improve unsightly lots. We're paving it over for additional guest parking. The community needs it, and your refusal to maintain a proper lawn is a liability. I just stared at her, my mind a sudden silent storm. Paving it. The words didn't compute. They were an alien language describing an impossible act, like saying you were going to bulldoze the sky. This wasn't a lot. It was a living, breathing memorial. It was my promise to my late wife, Sarah. It was 5 years of my life, of hauling compost, of battling invasive species, of carefully sourcing and sowing the seeds of dozens of native species. It was a registered and protected pollinator habitat certified by the United States Department of Agriculture. The excavators will be here Monday at 8 a.m. sharp, she announced, a triumphant little smile playing on her lips. You will be sent a bill for a special assessment to cover the costs, which I assure you will be substantial. This was it, the public humiliation, the financial threat, the declaration of war. I took a deep, steadying breath, the air thick with the life she wanted to suffocate under asphalt. Karen, I said, my voice dangerously calm, this is not a weed patch. This is a federally protected conservation habitat registered with the NRCN under the 2018 Farm Bill. If you bring a single piece of heavy machinery onto this property, you, the entire HOA board, and the company operating the equipment will be facing fines that start in the 6 figures, not to mention potential felony charges. I suggest you go back and read the certified letter I sent you 3 months ago. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second, a tiny crack in the porcelain mask of her entitlement. Oh, that silly internet thing, our lawyer said it was nonsense, just some paper you printed out to avoid mowing your lawn. It means nothing, the board's vote is final. She tapped her clipboard for emphasis. See you Monday. She turned and waddled back toward the sidewalk, a conquering hero departing the battlefield, oblivious to the fact that she had just kicked a hornet's nest the size of a minivan. I stood there watching her go, the hum of the bees in my field sounding less like a gentle chorus and more like the growing thrum of engines of war. This was the moment it all began, the moment a fight over flowers and bees became a battle for my home, my memories, and my sanity. If you believe in fighting for what's right, and that bullies, no matter how official they look, need to be put in their place, then hit that subscribe button. Let me know in the comments where you are watching from, and if you've ever had your own HOA nightmare, I want to hear about it, because you are not going to believe what I did next, and how a quiet veteran with a binder full of paperwork brought an entire corrupt organization to its knees. I turned back to my field, my sanctuary, my promise. The setting sun caught the iridescent wings of a dragonfly as it hovered over a cluster of bee balm, paving it. The sheer, unadulterated arrogance of it was breathtaking. It wasn't just an attack on my property, it was an attack on reason itself. My mind, Trained by decades in the Army Corps of Engineers to see problems as logistical puzzles, began to shift gears. The anger was there, a white-hot coal in my chest, but I packed it down, converting it from heat to fuel. Emotion was a liability. Strategy was an asset. I knelt back down, not to weed, but to touch the soil, to ground myself. This was Sarah's dream. She had been a botanist, a woman who could see a whole universe in a single seed. "You build things that last, Jack," she used to tell me, teasing me about my bridges and dams. "I build things that live." After she was gone, lost to a cancer that was as invasive and relentless as the thistle I was constantly pulling, this project was all I had left of her. It was our joint venture. I would do the engineering, the soil remediation, the irrigation, the grading, and I would follow her meticulous plans, her handwritten notes and drawings for a native prairie that would support the local ecosystem. Paving it wasn't just destroying my land, it was desecrating her memory. And that was a line no one, not even a power-mad HOA president with a clipboard and a team of discount lawyers, was ever going to be allowed to cross. The war was on. I watched until Karen's car, a pristine white SUV that was always parked slightly askew in her driveway, disappeared around the corner. The curtain-twitching neighbors, having witnessed the public execution of my landscaping choices, retreated back into their homes, their duty as neighborhood sentinels fulfilled. I was left alone with the buzzing of the bees and the cold, hard reality of the threat. Monday. She had given me less than 3 days. It was a classic shock and awe tactic, designed to overwhelm and force a quick surrender. She didn't know who she was dealing with. I went inside, the screen door slapping shut behind me with a sound of finality. My house was quiet, ordered, everything in its place. It was the home Sarah and I had bought 20 years ago, a modest ranch house on a generous 5-acre plot at the very edge of what was then just a new, sleepy suburban development called Oak Creek Meadows. We'd chosen it specifically for the land, a former farmer's field that backed up onto a small, wooded creek. The developer had been happy to sell it, as the terrain wasn't ideal for building more houses. For us, it was perfect. While I finished my career at the nearby Army base, Sarah had begun the slow, patient work of planting her prairie. She had binders, too. Binders filled with soil sample results, rainfall charts, and lists of native flora that had once thrived in this part of the state before being choked out by agriculture and development. Her dream was to turn this patch of depleted earth back into what it was meant to be, a self-sustaining habitat. After she passed, I found the binders tucked away in her office, a roadmap to a future she would never see. For the first year I did nothing. The grief was a heavy fog. But one spring morning, I saw a lone monarch butterfly struggling against the wind over the barren, weedy expanse of the field. It was looking for milkweed, for a place to lay its eggs, and finding none. In that moment, her project became my mission. It took 2 years just to prepare the soil, tilling and tons of compost and then to break up the dense clay. I followed her notes to the letter. Then came the seeding, a painstaking process of broadcasting a complex mix of native grasses and wildflowers she had specified. The first year, it looked like what Karen called it, a weed patch. But I was patient. I knew, as Sarah had known, that prairies don't happen overnight. By year 3, it was beginning to take shape. Patches of purple cone flower, brilliant orange butterfly weed, and delicate white prairie clover began to emerge. By year 5, this year, it was a masterpiece. A living tapestry that changed with the seasons, buzzing with a riot of life. It wasn't just a hobby. Following Sarah's lead, I had reached out to the local office of the USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service. A field agent, a kind, serious man named Dr. Evans, came out to see the project. He was astounded. He said it was one of the most ambitious private conservation efforts he'd ever seen. He was the one who helped me enroll the property in the Conservation Reserve Program, specifically under a provision for establishing pollinator habitats. It involved a mountain of paperwork, site inspections, and a binding 10-year contract. In exchange for maintaining the habitat according to their strict standards, I received a small annual stipend, which I immediately donated to the Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation, and, most importantly, The land was granted federal protection. I walked into my own small office and pulled a thick, three-ring binder from the bookshelf. The spine was labeled simply, "The Field." Inside, behind meticulously organized tabs, was every piece of paper related to the project. The original soil tests, Sarah's hand-drawn plans, receipts for seeds, and in the front, the signed contract with the USDA, the official certificate of participation, and copies of the certified letters I had sent to the Oak Creek Meadows HOA months ago, politely informing them of the land's new official status. I had done it as a courtesy, a preemptive measure. I'd known Karen even then. She had become HOA president 2 years ago on a campaign of restoring property values and enforcing the rules. Her reign had been one of petty tyranny. She measured the height of people's grass with a ruler. She sent violation notices for leaving garbage cans out for more than 12 hours. She tried to ban basketball hoops. She was a woman who had found her one tiny sliver of power in the world, and she wielded it like a cudgel. When I sent the letter, I received no reply. I assumed naively that the official USDA letterhead and the threat of federal oversight had been enough to make her back off. I had underestimated the potent combination of ignorance and arrogance. Now, sitting at my desk, the binder open in front of me, I began to formulate a plan. This was an information war, and she had just shown me that she was fighting with propaganda and bluster. I would fight with facts, regulations, and the full crushing weight of the United States government. I pulled up the HOA covenants on my computer, the same document she had quoted at me. Article 7, Section 3. I read it. It was vaguely worded, giving the board authority over common areas and undeveloped lots. But my property wasn't a common area, and with a federally registered conservation project on it, a strong legal argument could be made that it was far from undeveloped. It was, in fact, highly developed, just not with bricks and mortar. I scrolled further, looking for the clauses lawyers and bureaucrats love to ignore. And there it was, in the preamble, the mission statement of the HOA. To promote a sense of community, to preserve the natural beauty of the area, and to act as responsible stewards of the environment. Responsible stewards of the environment. I smiled. It was a small, cold smile. She had given me my first weapon. She was about to find out what it felt like to be buried under the weight of her own rulebook. The first step in any campaign is to seize the informational initiative. Engaging Karen directly would be a waste of breath, a descent into a screaming match on her turf. My turf was paper. It was documentation. It was the cold, irrefutable language of bureaucracy, a language I had learned to speak fluently over 30 years of service. On Friday morning, I sat at my desk and drafted a letter. This wasn't a polite notification. It was a formal cease and desist, a shot across the bow. I addressed it not just to the HOA Board of Directors, but to each member individually by name, including Karen. People are braver in a faceless group. They are more cautious when they are singled out. I began by referencing our conversation on Thursday afternoon and her stated intent to begin an excavation on my property, APN number 734-5B-21, on Monday morning. I used the official assessor's parcel number to establish a tone of legal formality. Then I laid it out, point by brutal point. Point 1, I wrote, the 5-acre parcel in question is not an undeveloped lot as defined by the covenants, but is, in fact, an active, federally registered conservation site under the USDA's Conservation Reserve Program, CRP, contract number 88-19-C-4510. A copy of this contract, which was provided to the board on March 12th of this year, is attached again for your convenience. I continued. Point 2. The destruction of or damage to a site enrolled in this program is a direct violation of federal law, specifically 7 CFR Section 1, 410.63. Such a violation triggers severe penalties, including but not limited to the immediate repayment of all federal funds received, substantial monetary fines assessed on a per-day basis until the habitat is restored to its original state, and potential criminal charges against all parties involved in the conspiracy to destroy the site. I made sure to use the word conspiracy. It was a loaded, ugly word, and I wanted it to echo in their heads. Point 3. The HOA's own governing documents in the preamble state a commitment to preserve the natural beauty of the area and to act as responsible stewards of the environment. The proposed action of paving a registered pollinator habitat to create a parking lot is in direct contradiction to this stated mission. The board would be acting in bad faith and in violation of its own charter. Finally, the kill shot. Point 4. Any action taken by the board with prior knowledge of these legal and financial risks constitutes willful and gross negligence. Be advised that most directors and officers, D&O liability insurance policies, contain an exclusion for acts of willful negligence. This means that if the HOA proceeds and the inevitable fines and legal judgments are levied, the board members may be held personally and individually liable for the full financial damages. I trust you will consult your insurance carrier to confirm this. I printed 5 copies of the letter and 5 copies of the entire USDA contract and certification packet. It made for a thick, intimidating stack of paper. I drove to the post office and sent each packet via certified mail with return receipt requested. The green certified mail slips were my proof that they had been warned unequivocally. There would be no "I didn't know" defense. Now they knew. They were on the hook. I spent the rest of Friday setting up a new security camera, a high-resolution one with a wide-angle lens, and mounting it to the eaves of my house, pointed directly at the entrance to my field. It fed a live signal directly to my tablet and recorded to a secure cloud server. If so much as a stray dog wandered onto that land, I would have a time-stamped, high-definition record of it. The weekend was tense. I tried to distract myself, working in the garden, cleaning my tools, but my mind was constantly running calculations. I expected a panicked phone call, a backtracking email. Instead, on Saturday afternoon, the mail carrier delivered a crisp white envelope. It was from the law firm of Smith, Kline, and Abernathy, the HOA's legal counsel. It was dated Friday, meaning they must have sent it before they received my certified letters. I tore it open. It was a short, brutally dismissive letter. It referred to my unsubstantiated claims and self-produced documentation. It stated in no uncertain terms that the HOA board had plenary authority over all landscaping and external modifications within Oak Creek Meadows, and that my property was no exception. It concluded with a threat. Should you interfere with the scheduled work on Monday morning, the HOA will seek a court order to have you removed and will pursue all available legal channels to recoup any and all costs associated with the delay. They were not only ignoring my warning, they were doubling down. They were calling my bluff. It was breathtakingly stupid. Their lawyer, clearly a cut-rate hack who did more contract boilerplate than actual litigation, hadn't even bothered to run a simple search on the federal programs I had cited. He had just taken Karen's version of events, that I was a crank making things up, and fired off a threatening letter. I looked from the lawyer's letter to the stack of green certified mail receipts on my desk. They would have received my packets by now. Somewhere in 5 separate houses across Oak Creek Meadows, board members were sitting with a thick stack of government documents that directly contradicted the advice of their own lawyer. The internal chaos must be delicious. A dry, humorless smile touched my lips. This was better than I could have hoped. They weren't just walking into a trap. They were sprinting into it, blindfolded, while their own legal counsel assured them the floor was solid. My resolve hardened into something crystalline and sharp. This was no longer just about defending my property. This was about dismantling a corrupt and incompetent system from the inside out. They had given me everything I needed. They had documented their own negligence. They had provided a paper trail of their own arrogance. Monday couldn't come soon enough. Realizing that a single-front war against a fortified, albeit foolish enemy was inefficient, I knew I had to open new fronts. An army of one is a noble idea, but a coalition is what wins wars. On Saturday morning, with the HOA lawyer's letter sitting on my desk like a coiled snake, I decided it was time to recruit. My first stop was next door. The Millers, a young couple with 2 small children, had moved in about 3 years ago. Their backyard bordered the western edge of my field. I often saw their kids, A boy and a girl under the age of 10, standing at the fence line, pointing at the butterflies and birds that my habitat attracted. I found Mark Miller out in his yard struggling with a new gas-powered weed whacker. He was a software engineer, more comfortable with code than with carburetors. "Morning, Mark," I said, leaning on the shared fence. He looked up, relief on his face at the interruption. "Hey, Jack, this thing is going to be the death of me." "Let me take a look at it later," I offered, "but I need to talk to you about something important. You may have seen our HOA president visiting me on Thursday." Mark's face clouded over. "Yeah, we saw her. Heard her too. Pretty hard not to. Is she serious about the parking lot?" "She is," I confirmed, "and I'm here to tell you what's really going on." I spent the next 10 minutes laying it all out. Sarah's dream, the 5 years of work, and the federal protection. I didn't show him the binder. That was too much for a casual chat, but I gave him the unvarnished truth. His wife, Emily, came out to join us, holding a cup of coffee. As I spoke, her expression shifted from concern to outrage. "But our kids love that field," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "Lily spent all last summer drawing the different butterflies. She has a whole sketchbook full of them. They can't just pave it." "They're going to try," I said, "and I'm going to stop them. But it would help to know I'm not alone." Mark looked at his wife, then back at me. "We're not ones to make waves, Jack. We get the violation notices if our grass is half an inch too long. We're worried about fines, about them making our lives difficult." "I understand that," I said. "I'm not asking you to storm the castle with me, just to be a witness. And if it comes to a community vote, to know the facts." Emily nodded, her jaw set. "They can send us all the notices they want. What they're doing is wrong. We're with you, Jack." One down. My next visit was 2 houses down, to Dave Hastings' place. Dave was a retired Marine gunnery sergeant, a man who kept his lawn trimmed to a precise 1/4 inch, not because of HOA rules, but because that's how a gunny maintains his AO. He was washing his pickup truck in the driveway, a machine so clean you could eat off the tailgate. "Dave, I said as I walked up. He turned, hose in hand, and gave me a sharp nod. "Jack, heard the dragon lady paid you a visit. Sounded like she was declaring war." "That's about the size of it," I said. I didn't need to give Dave the emotional backstory. I just gave him the tactical briefing. "She's bringing in excavators on Monday to pave the field for a parking lot. I've sent a cease and desist with proof of its federal CRP status and a warning about personal liability. Their lawyer sent a letter back calling my bluff." Dave turned off the hose and leaned against his truck, a grim smile spreading across his face. "So they've ignored direct warnings, disregarded federal statutes, and are proceeding with an illegal operation based on incompetent legal advice. Classic FUBAR." "Exactly," I said. "I've got a camera on the field. I've got a paper trail a mile long, but I need boots on the ground Monday morning. I need a witness who knows what they're looking at." "Say no more," Dave said, his eyes gleaming. "I'll be there. Oh, 700 on your porch, with coffee and a video camera. Those pencil-pushing tyrants have been running roughshod over this neighborhood for too long. It's time someone put them in their place. This is going to be fun." With my neighborhood flanks secured, I turned my attention to the bigger picture. I went back to my office and found the card for Dr. Evans, my contact at the NRCS. I called his office number, not expecting an answer on a Saturday, but was forwarded to a mobile number for urgent matters. He picked up on the second ring. "Evans? Dr. Evans, it's Jack Thompson. We have a problem." I quickly explained the situation. The HOA's vote, Karen's threat, the lawyer's letter, the imminent arrival of bulldozers. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Mr. Thompson," he said finally, his voice tight with professional concern, "this is extremely serious. You've sent them a formal notification of the CRP contract?" "Certified mail," I confirmed. "They're choosing to ignore it." "Okay," he said, and I could hear him typing in the background. "Here's what you need to do. First, you need to file a formal complaint with the USDA's Office of the Inspector General. They handle the investigation of crimes related to USDA programs. I'll email you the form and the contact information. Fill it out immediately. Second, I will be notifying the state office first thing Monday morning. We can't intervene directly in a civil dispute, but we can and will launch an official inquiry and send our own cease and desist order. The wheels of government turn slowly, Jack, but they grind exceedingly fine. He was giving me the official procedure, the by-the-book way to bring the federal hammer down. My last call of the day was to a lawyer. Through a Veterans Assistance Network, I found a recommendation for a woman named Maria Diaz. The network's description was simple: specializes in property law and kicking institutional butt. She agreed to a Sunday morning video conference. As I hung up the phone, I felt a sense of calm settle over me. The pieces were moving into position. Karen thought she was fighting a lone, stubborn old man. She had no idea she was about to be fighting a Marine gunny, a worried mother, a federal agency, and a lawyer who liked to kick butt. She was bringing a clipboard to a multi-front war. On Sunday morning, a face appeared on my computer screen that radiated an unnerving level of cheerful intensity. Maria Diaz had a sharp black bob, dark eyes that seemed to miss nothing, and a smile that suggested she genuinely enjoyed her job, especially the kicking institutional butt part. "Mr. Thompson," she began, her voice crisp and efficient, "I've reviewed the documents you sent over last night. The HOA covenants, their lawyer's letter, your cease and desist, and the CRP contract. Frankly, this is one of the most beautifully constructed cases of willful negligence I have ever seen. It's a work of art." I wasn't sure if I should be flattered or alarmed. "So you think we have a case?" I asked. She laughed, a short, sharp bark of a sound. "A case, Mr. Thompson? What we have here is a legal kill box. They are marching into it of their own free will, and their own lawyer is leading the parade. My job is simply to make sure the trap is properly sprung." Her confidence was infectious. For the next hour, she laid out the strategy with the precision of a field commander. "First," she said, "we let them make the first move. The fact that they are bringing in equipment after receiving your certified letter is the key. It elevates this from a contract dispute to an overt criminal act. Your camera is perfect. Your witness, the Marine, is even better." "What about a restraining order?" I asked. "We could file for a temporary restraining order first thing Monday morning." "We could," she agreed, "but it's better to let them commit. A TRO stops them before they break the law. I want to catch them in the act. It gives us maximum leverage. Let the operator show up. Let him put a single track on your property. The moment he does, the crime is committed. Then we move." She explained the next step. While I and Dave were holding the line at the property, she would be electronically filing a massive lawsuit against the HOA. Not just for a declaratory judgment, but for harassment, conspiracy, and attempted destruction of property. But the real masterstroke was in who she planned to notify. "The lawsuit is one thing," she said, pulling up another document on her screen. "But this is the real weapon." It was a letter addressed to the HOA's insurance carrier. "This is a notice of potential claim," she explained. "But more than that, it's a poison pill. We are informing them that their client, the HOA board, is about to take an action that they have been repeatedly warned is illegal. We are citing the federal statutes. We are highlighting your documentation. And we are stating in clear legal terms that their actions constitute willful, fraudulent, and malicious conduct." She leaned closer to her camera. "That's the magic phrase, Mr. Thompson. D&O insurance policies protect boards from honest mistakes and errors in judgment. They do not protect them from deliberate, illegal acts. By putting the carrier on notice before the event, we are essentially telling them that their client is a bad risk. They will almost certainly issue a reservation of rights letter to the HOA saying that if any of this is proven to be true, they will not cover a single penny of the damages, fines, or legal fees." My eyebrows shot up. "So the board members would be on the hook personally?" "Every last one of them," she confirmed with that fierce smile. "Their houses, their cars, their retirement accounts. We're not just threatening the HOA's bank account. We're threatening theirs. It's amazing how quickly principles evaporate when people's 401ks are on the line." While she was preparing the legal blitzkrieg, I had my own assignment. On her advice, I spent Sunday afternoon filling out the USDA Inspector General's complaint form that Dr. Evans had sent me. It was a dense, bureaucratic document, but I filled it out with the same meticulous care I had used on the field itself, cross-referencing my binder, attaching digital copies of every letter, every receipt, every photograph. I was building the official government case against them, brick by brick. Meanwhile, the neighborhood was starting to buzz. Dave had apparently done some recon on the community Facebook page. "It's a hornet's nest in there, Jack," he reported over the phone. "Karen's cronies are posting about the wonderful new community parking area and how it's going to solve the holiday parking problem. They're painting you as a selfish old recluse who won't share his empty field." "What are other people saying?" I asked. "It's split. A lot of people are just confused, but a few, the ones who've been on the receiving end of Karen's wrath, are starting to ask questions. The Millers posted a picture their daughter drew of the butterflies. That got a lot of positive reaction. The battle lines are being drawn." This was the other front, public opinion. Karen was using propaganda, painting a picture of community benefit while hiding the truth. I realized I needed to counter it. I found the email address for a reporter at the local paper, the Pave to the County Chronicle, who had written a few articles on local environmental issues. Her name was Sarah Jenkins. I composed a short, professional email with the subject line, "Local HOA votes to pave over federally protected pollinator habitat." I briefly outlined the situation and attached two documents, the USDA certificate and the HOA lawyer's threatening letter. I hit send. It was a long shot, but it was another front opened, another potential fire they would have to fight. As Sunday evening fell, a strange sense of peace descended. The legal trap was set. My allies were in place. The government was being notified. The media had been alerted. I had done everything I could. Now all I had to do was wait for the enemy to arrive. I sat on my back porch, watching the fireflies begin to rise from the tall grasses of the field, their gentle, blinking lights a silent testament to the life that thrived there. They were like tiny, floating lanterns, illuminating the battlefield on the eve of the fight. Karen thought she was bringing a bulldozer. I was bringing the law, the media, and a whole world of trouble she couldn't possibly comprehend. The first casualty in any war is public perception. While I was building my legal and bureaucratic fortress, Karen was waging a brilliant, if utterly dishonest, campaign for the hearts and minds of Oak Creek Meadows. The neighborhood Facebook group, a place normally reserved for lost cat photos and complaints about teenagers, had become her personal propaganda ministry. Her chief lieutenant, a woman named Carol who lived across the street from me and whose lawn was a chemically dependent monoculture of perfect fescue, led the charge. "It's so exciting that the board is finally dealing with the unsightly fire hazard at the end of the street," she posted, alongside a picture of my field taken in late autumn, when the grasses were brown and dormant, making it look dry and neglected. "The new guest parking will be a wonderful amenity for all of us, especially with the holidays coming up." The comments section lit up. Karen's supporters chimed in with enthusiasm. "Great news! Property values will go up. Thank you to Karen and the board for their hard work. It's about time. That weed patch is an eyesore." But then a few dissenting voices emerged. Emily Miller, my neighbor, posted a simple reply. It was a photo her daughter had taken with a cheap digital camera. A stunning close-up of a monarch butterfly on a vibrant pink stalk of milkweed. Her caption was just 3 words: "We will miss this." The post got over 50 likes. Then Dave waded in, his approach less subtle. "Just so everyone is clear," he wrote, "this isn't an unsightly fire hazard. It's a professionally managed and federally protected wildlife habitat that our neighbor, a decorated Army veteran, built as a memorial to his late wife. The board was notified of its protected status months ago and is choosing to ignore federal law. This isn't a community improvement. It's an illegal act of vandalism that's going to cost every homeowner in this neighborhood a fortune in fines." The digital battlefield exploded. Accusations flew. Carol accused Dave of being disrespectful to the board's authority. Dave retorted by asking if the board's authority supersedes the U.S. criminal code. People who had been fined by Karen for trivial things began to speak up, sharing their own stories of her overreach. The community, once placidly obedient, was fracturing in real time. The conflict spilled offline. The miller's son came home from playing in the park with tears in his eyes. Carol's son, a boy a few years older, had told him my field was full of dangerous bugs and that his dad was a weirdo bug lover. This crossed a line. It was one thing to attack me, a man who could defend himself. It was another to bring children into it. The personal stakes were rising. That evening, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. "Is this Jack Thompson?" a voice asked. It was young, energetic, and professional. "This is Sarah Jenkins from the County Chronicle. I got your email, and I have to say, Mr. Thompson, this is one hell of a story." Relief washed over me. She had taken the bait. "I'm glad you think so," I said. "I'm not looking to start a war with my neighbors, but the facts are the facts." "The facts are fantastic," she said, a newshound's excitement in her voice. "Veterans Memorial Field, a beautiful tribute to your wife, versus a power-mad HOA. It's David versus Goliath with a federal twist. Can I come out tomorrow morning? I'd love to see the field, talk to you, maybe get a photo." I hesitated. I didn't want this to be a sob story. "On one condition," I said. "This story's about the facts, the law, the conservation program. It's not about me being a lonely widower. It's about an abuse of power and the importance of environmental stewardship." "Even better," she said. "Facts make a story bulletproof. I can be there at 9. Will that work?" "9 will be fine," I said, knowing full well the fireworks were scheduled for an hour earlier. "Things might be a little eventful in the morning." "Eventful is good," she replied. "I'll bring my camera." The arrival of the media, even just one reporter from a local paper, changed the entire dynamic. Karen was operating in the shadows, using gossip and misinformation. The press was a spotlight. It would force everything into the open. The story was no longer just about me and my field. It was becoming a public record. It was a narrative that Karen could no longer control. I spent the rest of the evening preparing for both the confrontation and the interview. I laid out my old Army service uniform, not to wear, but to have ready. The visual of a veteran's uniform next to a binder of federal documents was a powerful piece of nonverbal communication. I made a fresh pot of coffee and filled a thermos for Dave. I charged all my devices, my phone, my tablet displaying the camera feed, and a backup battery pack. As the sun went down, casting a final golden light over the field, I saw the Millers in their backyard. Mark was on a ladder hanging a new brightly colored bird feeder on a pole right at the fence line. Emily and the kids were below, filling it with seed. It was a small act, but it was a public declaration. It was a flag being planted. They were no longer just silent supporters, they were allies. The community was no longer a monolithic entity under Karen's thumb. It was a neighborhood of individuals, and they were starting to choose sides. Karen thought she was leading a unified charge. She was about to discover her army was on the verge of a civil war. Monday morning broke cool and clear, the kind of perfect late spring day that made you believe in good things. But a knot of tension was coiled in my stomach. At 700 hours, exactly as promised, Dave Hastings appeared on my front porch. He was holding a large travel mug in one hand and a professional-grade camcorder in the other. He wore a faded Marine Corps ball cap and an expression of grim satisfaction. "Morning, Jack," he said, his voice a low rumble. "It's a beautiful day for a battle." "That it is, Gunny," I replied, handing him the thermos. "Coffee's hot." We sat in the chairs on my porch, a perfect vantage point overlooking the street and the entrance to my field. My tablet was on the small table between us, showing a live, wide-angle feed from the new security camera. The street was quiet, deceptively peaceful. Birds sang in the oak trees that gave the neighborhood its name. A lone jogger went by, giving us a curious look. For 45 minutes, we sat in comfortable silence, two old soldiers waiting for the show to start. Then, at 07:52, we heard it. A low, deep rumble from down the street, the unmistakable sound of a heavy diesel engine. A moment later, a massive flatbed truck, the kind used to haul heavy construction equipment, turned the corner. Chained to its bed was a mid-sized bulldozer, its yellow paint bright against the morning sun. Its steel blade looked like a guillotine. Behind it, a white Ford F-150 with the logo Frank's Excavation and Landscaping followed closely. "Showtime," Dave murmured, raising his camcorder to his shoulder. He started recording. The truck lumbered to a stop directly in front of my property, its air brakes hissing like a dragon. A third vehicle, Karen's pristine white SUV, pulled up across the street, parking well out of the direct line of sight, but close enough for her to have a front row seat. I could see her silhouette in the driver's seat, a queen surveying her conquest. The truck driver, a burly man in a flannel shirt, got out and began unchaining the dozer. The pickup driver, presumably Frank himself, a grizzled man with a weathered face and a clipboard of his own, walked to the edge of my property. He looked at his paperwork, then at the field, a slight frown on his face. This was it, the moment of truth. Ms. Diaz's voice echoed in my head. Let them make the first move. Let them commit. I stood up, my heart hammering against my ribs, but my hands were steady. I picked up a single sheet of paper from the table. It was a document Ms. Diaz had prepared, a laminated one-page notice. At the top, in bold red letters, it read, Official Notice, Federally Protected Conservation Site. Below, it detailed the CRP contract number, cited the specific federal statutes, and summarized the civil and criminal penalties for trespassing and destruction of the habitat, including fines up to $500,000 and potential imprisonment. At the bottom was the official seal of the USDA, looking stern and inviolable. I walked calmly down my driveway, not toward Karen's car, but directly toward the bulldozer operator. Dave followed a few paces behind, his camera a silent, unblinking eye. The operator, whose name tag read Gus, was about to climb into the cab of the dozer. Morning, I said, my voice even. Before you start, I have a legal notice for you and your boss. Frank, the owner, strode over looking annoyed. What's this about? We have a work order from the HOA. I ignored him and spoke directly to Gus, the man whose hands would be on the controls. I held out the laminated sheet. I'm required by law to inform you that this land is a federally protected conservation site. If you move that machine onto this property, you, your boss, and your company will be committing a federal crime. The penalties are severe. I'd recommend you read this before you turn that key. Gus paused, one foot on the track of the dozer. He looked from my face to the paper. He took it and began to read. Frank snatched it from his hand. What is this garbage? The HOA president said you might try something like this. He glanced at it, his eyes scanning the bold red letters, the USDA seal, the dollar signs. His expression of annoyed confidence began to curdle into confusion, then alarm. He looked at my field, a place buzzing with bees and fluttering with butterflies, then back at the paper. He looked at me, a calm, gray-haired man in simple work clothes. He looked at Dave, a formidable-looking man filming his every move. And he looked over at Karen's SUV, where a woman was hiding in her car, expecting him to fight her battle. Frank was no fool. He was a small business owner, not a legal scholar, but he knew the difference between a cranky homeowner and a potential federal indictment. He walked over to his truck, grabbed his radio, and spoke into it. Yeah, boss, we got a problem down here at the Oak Creek job. The homeowner's got some kind of government paper. Says it's a federal site. Yeah, a $500,000 fine? Prison time? No, I'm not kidding. There was a pause. I could hear squawking from the radio. Frank listened, then said, No, I'm not risking my business and my freedom for some lady's parking lot. We're out of here. He clicked off the radio, turned to Gus, and jerked his thumb. Pack it up. We're not touching this. Gus looked visibly relieved. He hopped down from the dozer and started helping the driver resecure the chains. The car door across the street flew open. Karen, her face a mask of crimson fury, stormed towards us, her clipboard now looking like a whimsy, pathetic toy. What is the meaning of this? She shrieked at Frank. You have a contract. The homeowners association will sue you. Frank just shook his head, his expression a mixture of pity and disgust. Lady, you can sue me all you want, he said, his voice flat. But I'm not going to federal prison for you. You told me this was a simple lot clearing. You lied. He turned his back on her, got into his pickup, and with a final dismissive wave to his driver, pulled away. The big flatbed truck rumbled back to life, performed a laborious three-point turn, and drove off, taking the bulldozer with it. Karen was left standing in the middle of the street, her mouth open, her face a collage of shock and impotent rage. It was 08:15. Her grand invasion had lasted less than 30 minutes and had ended in a complete and humiliating retreat. She had been publicly repudiated, called a liar, and abandoned by her own hired muscle. Dave lowered his camera, a slow grin spreading across his face. Well, he said, that was a catastrophic failure to launch. The departure of the bulldozer was not an ending, but the beginning of a new, more dangerous phase of the conflict. Karen's public humiliation had turned her rage into a focused, venomous vendetta. But she was no longer dealing with just me. The failed excavation had triggered a cascade of consequences she was utterly unprepared for. On Tuesday, a black sedan with government plates parked quietly on my street. A man in a conservative gray suit, carrying a leather briefcase, knocked on my door. He introduced himself as Agent Marcus Thorne from the USDA's Office of the Inspector General. His demeanor was all business, his eyes sharp and analytical. "Mr. Thompson," he said after I invited him in, "we received your complaint. The attempt to bring heavy machinery onto a registered CRP site is a matter we take very seriously." For the next 2 hours, I walked him through everything. I gave him the binder, my weapon, and he photographed every page with a portable scanner. I showed him the time-stamped video from my security camera and the footage Dave had taken. He listened intently, taking meticulous notes, his expression unreadable. When he was done, he handed me his card. "We will be launching a full investigation into a possible conspiracy to commit property damage against the United States government," he said, his tone leaving no room for doubt. "We will be interviewing the board members, the HOA's legal counsel, and the owner of the excavation company. We will be subpoenaing all relevant emails, text messages, and meeting minutes from the HOA. I would advise you not to speak with any of them directly. Let the process work." The federal government had now officially entered the war. While Agent Thorne was beginning his methodical dissection of the HOA's incompetence, my lawyer, Ms. Diaz, launched her own assault. She filed the lawsuit and, more importantly, served the notice to the HOA's insurance company. The effect was immediate and devastating. On Wednesday, I received a call from Mark Miller, my neighbor. He worked from home and had a view of the treasurer's house. "Jack, you are not going to believe this," he said, his voice hushed. "There's a FedEx truck at Arthur Pinter's house. He's the HOA treasurer. He just signed for a huge packet of documents, and he does not look happy. He's just standing in his doorway, white as a ghost, reading it." That was the poison pill arriving. That was Arthur Pinter, a retired accountant who likely joined the board to feel important, realizing that his personal nest egg was now in jeopardy because of Karen's ego. The board began to crack. Late Thursday afternoon, Ms. Diaz received a call from a lawyer she didn't recognize. He was representing Arthur Pinter, and only Arthur Pinter. He wanted to talk. "He's terrified," she told me over the phone later. "The insurance company sent them all a reservation of rights letter, just as we predicted. It basically says they're on their own. Pinter wants to cut a deal." And he had brought a gift. He had emails. A whole chain of them. It started with my original certified letter from months ago. In the emails, Pinter and another board member asked Karen if they should be concerned about the USDA thing. Karen's reply was the smoking gun. "Don't worry about it," she had written. "I've spoken to our lawyer. He says it's just some frivolous paperwork Thompson printed off the internet to get out of mowing. It has no legal standing. We have full authority to proceed. I will handle it." She had lied. She had deliberately concealed the risk from her own board. She had misrepresented the advice of their lawyer, or their lawyer was colossally incompetent. Either way, she had acted in bad faith, not just against me, but against the very people she was supposed to be leading. This changed everything. It was no longer just the board versus me. It was now the board versus Karen. Ms. Diaz immediately drafted a settlement offer. It was brutal and simple. 1. The HOA would issue a formal public apology to me in the community newsletter and on the official website. 2. The HOA would immediately begin the process of amending the covenants to permanently recognize the protected status of my property and establish a permanent conservation easement, ensuring no future board could ever threaten it again. 3. The HOA would pay 100% of my legal fees to date. 4. Karen would resign from the HOA board, effective immediately. If they accept, Ms. Diaz explained, we drop the civil suit. The federal investigation will proceed on its own course, but Pinter's cooperation will likely spare him and the other duped members from serious charges. All the federal heat will focus on one person, Karen. This gives them a way out. It isolates her completely. The offer was sent not to the HOA's general counsel, but to the individual lawyers who were now being hired by the terrified board members. The united front of the Oak Creek Meadows HOA was shattered. It was every man for himself. Karen, who had built her little empire on the principle of collective authority, was about to find out what it felt like to be utterly and completely alone. The community she claimed to be improving was about to turn on her with a vengeance. The stage was being set for a final public reckoning. The emergency HOA meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday night in the community clubhouse, a sterile beige room that usually hosted yoga classes and children's birthday parties. Tonight, it was a courtroom, a theater, and an execution chamber all in one. The air was thick with tension and the scent of burnt coffee. The room was packed, standing room only. Every homeowner who had ever been annoyed by a violation notice or bullied by Karen was there, their faces a mixture of anger and morbid curiosity. In the back, I saw Sarah Jenkins, the reporter from the Chronicle, her notebook open. Next to her, a cameraman from a regional TV news station that had picked up her story was making discreet adjustments to his lens. This was no longer a neighborhood dispute. It was a media event. I sat in the front row with Dave on one side and the Millers on the other. Ms. Diaz sat next to me, her briefcase on her lap, an aura of calm, predatory readiness about her. The board members were seated at a long folding table at the front, facing the crowd, all except one. Karen's chair was empty. Then, just as the meeting was about to start, she made her entrance. She wasn't waddling tonight. She strode in, her head held high, wearing a bright red power suit. She was flanked by a man in an expensive-looking suit, a new lawyer, clearly a high-priced litigator, and not the cheap boilerplate artist they had been using before. She was not surrendering. She was preparing for her last stand. She took her seat, surveyed the hostile crowd with an icy glare, and banged a gavel on the table. This emergency meeting of the Oak Creek Meadows Homeowners Association will now come to order, she announced, her voice strained. We are here tonight to address the recent misinformation that has been circulating in our community regarding a proposed community improvement project. She launched into a prepared statement, a masterpiece of obfuscation and legalese. She spoke of exploring options, due diligence, and the complexities of covenant enforcement. She never once mentioned my name, the field, the USDA, or the failed excavation. She was trying to reframe the entire fiasco as a procedural misunderstanding. The crowd was not buying it. Before she could finish, a hand shot up in the audience. It was Dave. Karen ignored him. I do not recognize the gentleman, she sniffed. Dave stood up anyway. His voice, trained to carry across a noisy firing range, filled the room. The hell you don't, Karen. I'm Dave Hastings, 412 Oak Drive. We've all read the news reports. We've seen the TV cameras. We know about the federal investigation. I have a simple question, and I want a yes or no answer. Did you or did you not deliberately hide the federal protection status of Mr. Thompson's property from the rest of the board and from the homeowners? The room went silent. All eyes were on Karen. Her new lawyer whispered something in her ear. This is not the proper forum for such accusations, Karen snapped. If you have a complaint, you can submit it in writing. Then another person stood up. It was Arthur Pinter, the treasurer, his face pale, his hands trembling as he held a sheaf of printed emails. She's lying, he said, his voice shaking but clear. She did hide it. I have the emails right here. We asked her about the federal warnings, and she told us it was frivolous nonsense. She told us her lawyer had handled it. She put every single one of us, our savings, our homes, at risk to satisfy her own ego. He threw the papers down on the table in front of her. Chaos erupted. People started shouting, demanding answers. Karen banged her gavel uselessly, her face a mask of fury. Her fortress of authority had been breached from within. Amidst the noise, Miss Diaz stood up. She didn't raise her voice. She simply stood, and a pocket of silence formed around her. My name is Maria Diaz, she said, her voice cutting through the din. "I am Mr. Thompson's legal counsel. Mr. Pinter is telling the truth. We have affidavits from him and another board member confirming that Ms. Peterson," she used Karen's last name, stripping her of her title, "engaged in a deliberate campaign of deception. She has exposed this HOA to hundreds of thousands of dollars in potential federal fines and civil penalties. Right now, the only thing standing between this community and bankruptcy is a settlement offer I have extended to the board." She let that hang in the air for a moment. "The offer is simple. The HOA apologizes, pays Mr. Thompson's legal fees, and amends the covenants to protect his property forever. And Ms. Peterson resigns from this board tonight." The new lawyer stood up. "My client will not be bullied." He was cut off by a voice from the crowd. "Motion to remove Karen Peterson from the board for gross negligence and malfeasance." It was another homeowner, a man Karen had once fined for having a political sign in his yard a day too early. "Second," shouted a dozen voices at once. According to the HOA's own bylaws, a motion from the floor with a second required an immediate vote. Karen's face went white. She looked at her fellow board members, but they wouldn't meet her eyes. They were saving themselves. The acting vice president, a meek woman who usually just nodded along with Karen, took control. "A motion has been made and seconded to remove Karen Peterson from the presidency and the board. All in favor say aye." A deafening roar of "aye" shook the room. "All opposed?" The only sound was the hum of the air conditioner and the whirring of the news camera. "The motion carries," the vice president said, her voice barely a whisper. "Karen Peterson is removed from the board, effective immediately." I finally stood up. The room quieted. I looked at Karen, whose face had crumbled into a mask of disbelief and hatred. Then I addressed the community. "My name is Jack Thompson. My late wife, Sarah, and I bought our home here 20 years ago. She was a botanist. The field you all call a weed patch was her dream. A dream of bringing a little piece of nature back to a world that's too full of concrete and asphalt. After she died, I made it my mission to finish it for her. I followed the rules. I filed the paperwork. I worked with the government to make it a permanent, protected place for the birds and the bees and the butterflies. I did everything right. This was never about parking spaces. It was never about property values. It was about whether we are a community that is governed by rules and respect, or by the whims of one person's ego. I think tonight you've given a very clear answer." I sat down. It was over. Karen, without another word, grabbed her purse and shoved her way through the crowd, a fallen queen fleeing her conquered kingdom. The room erupted, not in anger anymore, but in applause. It wasn't for me. It was for themselves. They had taken their community back. In the aftermath of the town hall showdown, the pieces fell into place with astonishing speed. Karen, stripped of her power and publicly disgraced, vanished from the neighborhood's public life. Her house went up for sale 2 weeks later. The for sale sign on her perfectly manicured, chemically treated lawn was a monument to her defeat. The remaining board members, humbled and terrified of further legal action, were tripping over themselves to be cooperative. The very next day, they formally accepted Ms. Diaz's settlement offer in its entirety. A check for my full legal fees arrived by courier. The HOA's website was updated with a formal, if stilted, apology for the misunderstanding regarding my property. The most significant part of the victory came in the form of a thick legal document. Working with Ms. Diaz and the new chastened HOA board, we drafted an amendment to the community covenants. It wasn't just a simple recognition of my field. It was a permanent conservation easement, legally recorded with the county. It meant that the 5 acres were protected in perpetuity, bound to the deed of the land itself, no matter who owned it. No future board, no matter how power-hungry or ignorant, could ever threaten it again. It was a fortress of legal protection built around Sarah's dream. A few months later, I received a letter from the USDA's Office of the Inspector General. The investigation was closed. The HOA as an entity was cleared of wrongdoing due to its full cooperation and the remedial actions it had taken. The board members who had been misled by Karen were given a formal warning. As for Karen herself, Agent Thorne's report was scathing. It detailed her deliberate deception and reckless disregard for federal law. She was personally fined $25,000 for her role in conspiring to damage the conservation site. It wasn't prison time, But for a woman whose entire identity was wrapped up in financial status and social standing, it was a crippling blow, a permanent public record of her disgrace. The neighborhood began to heal. The deep divisions she had created started to fade. The new HOA president, elected in the wake of the scandal, was Dave Hastings. He took the job reluctantly, grumbling about desk jockey duty, but he ran the board with the no-nonsense fairness of a good gunny. The violation notices stopped being about grass height and started being about genuine safety issues. The focus shifted from punitive enforcement to actual community events. There was a neighborhood barbecue, a 4th of July parade for the kids. The Facebook group became a place for friendly conversation again. One Saturday afternoon, I was on my knees in the field, just as I had been that day Karen first confronted me. I was examining a new cluster of swamp milkweed, a variety Sarah had been particularly excited about. The air was thick with the buzz of life. The field was in its high summer glory, a riot of color and motion. "Hey, Mr. Thompson!" I looked up. It was Lily Miller, my neighbor's daughter, standing at the fence. She was holding up her sketchbook. "I drew a new one," she said proudly. "It's a pipe vine swallowtail. It has blue on its wings." I smiled. "That's a beautiful one, Lily. They love the Dutchman's pipe vine over by the creek." Her father, Mark, came and stood beside her. "We're putting in a small butterfly garden in our yard now," he said, looking a little sheepish. "Emily bought a book. We're trying to plant stuff the caterpillars like." "That's wonderful, Mark," I said, my heart swelling. The change wasn't just legal or political, it was cultural. People were starting to see the field not as a problem, but as an asset. They were connecting with it. Dave ambled over from his house, 2 cold bottles of beer in his hand. He passed one to me over the fence. "How's the war-winningest piece of real estate in the county, Jack?" he asked, taking a long swallow from his bottle. "Peaceful, Gunny," I said, looking out over the expanse of flowers and grasses. "Finally peaceful." We stood there for a while, the 3 of us, just watching the field. The sun was warm on my back. The sounds were of bees and children's laughter. The fight had been ugly and stressful, a battle I never wanted. But in the end, the victory was more profound than I could have imagined. I hadn't just saved a piece of land. I had helped restore a community's sense of decency. I had defended my wife's memory and ensured her legacy would outlive us all. I took out my wallet and pulled out a worn, folded photograph of Sarah. She was younger, smiling, standing in a field of wildflowers much like this one. "We did it, honey," I whispered. "It's safe now." The binder full of paperwork was back on its shelf in my office, a quiet testament to the battle that was fought and won. It was proof that one person, armed with the truth, meticulous records, and unwavering resolve, could face down arrogance and ignorance and win. The field, my field, Sarah's field, was more than just a patch of land. It was a symbol of resilience. It was a promise kept. And as a gentle breeze rustled through the tall prairie grass, it felt like the land itself was breathing a sigh of relief. Justice, like the native seeds we had planted, had taken root, and it was beautiful.